Hello, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Minjani, Tobela. Welcome to each and every single one of you, whether you're here in Cape Town, South Africa, like me, in Washington, DC, the capital of the United States, or if you're somewhere else in the US, South Africa, or anywhere in this big, beautiful world. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today for the Friends of South Africa's film screening of A Towering Task, the story of the Peace Corps, and our panel discussion on racial justice and the future of the Peace Corps. I guarantee you today will be a dynamic, thoughtful, complex, and much needed conversation at the intersection of diversity, inclusion, and both the role and the responsibility of a major US government agency like the Peace Corps working all over the world to promote anti-racist practices and support equity for people of color. My name is Nicole Bannister, and I am your moderator for today's event. I am half Persian, half Black American, and all big hair. I am the founder and commissioner of the digital storytelling platform My Basketball Team, where I share real stories submitted by folks across the globe about dating and relationships. My basketball team hopes to build a more sex-positive world with reduced incidents of gender-based violence by openly sharing people's lived experiences of intimacy. I am a United Nations Alliance of Civilizations Fellow, and I have been working for over a decade with the private sector, government ministries, and community-based organizations in 20 countries across Africa and the Western Pacific to scale youth-friendly sexual health programming across the globe. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, but perhaps the most important thing you need to know about me for this event is that I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer, or RPCV, from South Africa. Having served as a school and community resources volunteer from 2013 to 2016 in the rural province of Limpopo, as well as a third-year extension of my Peace Corps service with the nonprofit organization Grassroots Soccer in Cape Town. I came to South Africa to serve as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I simply never left. So, now that I've introduced myself, we want each of you to introduce yourselves. So please drop in the chat, drop your name, drop where you're tuning in from. If you're affiliated with the Peace Corps, feel free to share, your country of service and your years of service. Just as much as we are very much looking forward to you all learning about us, we also want to learn about you. So please drop into the chat, where you're tuning in from today. We have come together today to have one of the most critical and complex conversations of our time. It is February 2021. We're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, a global health crisis that has closed borders, disrupted economies, changed all of our lives, and proven the reality of how interconnected the world we live in truly is. It's Black History Month in the United States, where we intentionally honor and showcase the achievements and contributions of Black Americans in the United States and beyond, and where we reflect on the continued struggle for equity and racial justice faced daily by Black Americans. And it's an unprecedented moment for the United States Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is a US government agency that sends American volunteers to live in countries around the world and work side by side with that country's local community leaders in order to provide technical assistance that supports the people of those countries to meet their need for trained men and women, to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served overseas, and to help promote a better understanding of other people and cultures globally back in the United States. This week is Peace Corps Week, a week spent amplifying the United States Peace Corps and its ongoing contributions to global peace and friendship. This week is the 60th anniversary of the Peace Corps, acknowledging that in just 2 days, it was exactly 60 years ago that President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 10924 on March 1st, 1961 to launch the Peace Corps. Since that time, over 240,000 American Peace Corps volunteers have served in 142 countries, supporting projects ranging from education, the environment, public health, agriculture, youth development, and community economic development. This moment is unprecedented for the Peace Corps because for the first time ever in the 60 years of the Peace Corps, there are no volunteers serving in any country anywhere, all of whom were evacuated in March 2020 due to growing safety concerns around the spread of the coronavirus. So while there are still American and host country staff members employed by the Peace Corps globally, there are no actively serving volunteers. As we reflect back on the movie, A Towering Task, which many of you watched with us last night, where we rooted ourselves in the history and the founding of the Peace Corps, as we think about this global pause in Peace Corps service, and as we reflect back on a tumultuous 2020 that very publicly exposed the devastating ongoing effects of racism in the United States and around the world through Black Lives Matter, hailed by many as the largest movement in United States history, with over 26 million people participating in protests domestically and even more overseas. We now have to look back on the history of the Peace Corps and use today's current socio-political climate to answer the hard question that informs the future. What role does the Peace Corps play in the 21st century with regard to addressing racial injustice and systemic racism? I often tell people that I am from the most institutionally racist country in the world, but I live in the most overtly racist country in the world. Racism dictates that one set of people is superior to another on the basis of skin color or ethnicity. In the cases of both the United States and South Africa, white people have historically claimed that superior set of people to be them. Thus, South Africa and the United States share uniquely paralleled histories when it comes to racial injustice. While the United States passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, where after hundreds of years of slavery and Jim Crow laws, people could no longer legally be discriminated against based on their race or sex or religion or national origin, South Africa only emerged from apartheid, the set of ideologies and laws that forcibly and cruelly separated different racial groups, in 1994. 1994, just 20-something odd years ago, marked South Africa's biggest victory for simultaneous civil rights and democracy. The United States Peace Corps entered South Africa in 1997 during Nelson Mandela's historic presidency, and since then, over 1,700 American volunteers have served across the Rainbow Nation. It thus only makes sense for the Friends of South Africa RPCV group to be hosting our dynamic conversation today. To tell you a little bit more about the Friends of South Africa and our nonprofit partner for today's event, I am honored to introduce my dear friend and fellow Peace Corps South Africa RPCV, Sam Crawford. And don't forget, folks, drop your details, your years, your country of service, where you're coming in from, into the chat. We would love to all see and engage with you. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Whatever time it is where you are, we thank you for taking the time to join this conversation. Thanks to the small but mighty Friends of South Africa planning team, and especially to Yancey Lewis and Summer Gardner. This event would not be possible without all of your behind the scenes efforts to make it happen. We are so pleased to have Nicole as our MC today. Nicole and I met while serving in South Africa together as Peace Corps volunteers, and Friends of South Africa would not exist without her support. We founded this organization together in the summer of 2017 in a cafe in Columbia Heights in Washington, D.C. It was just after I moved to the area and just before Nicole moved back to South Africa. You can think of Friends of South Africa as a type of alumni organization for returned Peace Corps volunteers of South Africa, although our membership is open to anyone interested in joining. Our vision is a united and vibrant community among Friends of South Africa. How can we promote a united and vibrant community when racial inequality still exists and still persists? When many of us might not identify as racist, but many of us have not actively stood up and embodied anti-racism. As Nicole mentioned, the United States and South Africa share uniquely parallel histories. During our pre-service training, all Peace Corps South Africa volunteers in training go to the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg. We witnessed the legacy of apartheid in our communities for our 2 years of service. All of us witnessed systemic racism at work in the US, through the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. It's hard not to feel helpless sometimes, but we have power. How can we harness that power? How can we use our privileges to fight for all human beings, to have their basic human rights upheld? How can we support our members, our communities, and ourselves in our journeys to become actively anti-racist in our own daily lives? As Nicole and our panelists share their perspectives and highlight what they believe racial justice looks like for the Peace Corps, we encourage you to reflect on what racial justice looks like in your everyday life. What can you do to make this world a more equitable, just, and vibrant place for everyone? Following our discussion today, we invite you to share your reflections with friends, with family members, roommates, partners, colleagues, and others. Friends of South Africa also hosts a non-traditional virtual book club, which we invite you to join. A link will be provided in the chat. This book club is designed to hold participants accountable to their self-education beyond the trending hashtags of social media and the ebb and flow of the news cycle. While some of the books on the list have a waiting list, others are available now. Please feel welcome and encouraged to join. Thanks to your generosity, we are able to donate over $600 to I Am We Are through this event. We have asked our panelists and our MC to share a cause focused on racial justice that is meaningful to them. We'll also be making a donation on behalf of each of them to these organizations, and we invite you to do the same. We'll share the links to these organizations in the chat. Before we get started with our panel, we thought you might be interested to learn about I Am We Are, which was founded by South Africa response volunteer, Misha Robinson. Summer, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event. So I am going to give a little speech on behalf of I Am We Are, sent to you from Misha. So I Am We Are is dedicated to creating a world where all youth are socially engaged, globally aware, and economically free. The organization strives to empower youth across Africa and her dysphoria with the tools of confidently owning their futures. I Am We Are works with youth ages 12 to 25 of African descent who are challenged to pursue their ambitions because of constraints imposed on them by their environment. Misha and her team work to make sure the youth of their program have a full understanding of who they are and what they truly can achieve, and have the tools, mindset, resources, and a plan to achieve their goals. Misha has been doing this work for the last 5 years in South Africa's Royal Bafokeng Nation, and is working now to bring the program to the Prince George County in Maryland in the US. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Misha and play a short video.
Good afternoon. My name is Misha Lerato Robinson. I served in Benin 2000 to 2002 and also in South Africa in 2012. I'm the founder and the chief executive of Hope of I Am We Are. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today and supporting Friends of South Africa. And I'd like to thank Friends of South Africa for all of your support. Thank you sincerely. I'm not going to say much because I really want y'all to hear from the youth that are in our program. But just to add one thing to the conversation that you are having today, one of the freedom fighters once told me that apartheid was the legalized removal of hope. And what I know as a Black American is that slavery did the same thing. Jim Crow did the same thing. Colonialization did the same thing. And what I really hope is that I Am We Are can help to rekindle that hope, not just in youth in South Africa, but youth across Africa and across the diaspora. So thank you. Feel free to join us on our journey to do just that by going to our website, which is imweareyouth.org, and feel free to follow us on social media as well at I Am We Are Youth. Thank you again for your support.
Good day, everyone. My name is Betty and I'm energetic. I'm one of ambassador of Aimuya. Aimuya has made my life better because it has taught me many things. I didn't know about myself. IMWA has taught me to give more, learn, learn to become aware of what's happening around me and what other people are expecting or experiencing. It has taught me to be positive, don't be afraid to show my passion. I was one of the person who didn't like to experience my feelings or ideas or participate in many things. IMWA has taught me to be a great listener. I was one of people who do not like to speak in front of people, and I was shy, but not now. I have learned to speak up, show confidence, and maybe express new ideas that I have. Now I'm better at setting goals, planning ahead, making decisions, work with other people. I have survived the worst. Nothing can break me now. I have learned to go extra miles, initiative, to accomplish tasks without being asked, and to be a great leader, to connect with others inside and outside, and to think outside the box and be friendly. IMWA has given us many opportunities, like going to the universities to weigh our option, and the great experience was going to Cape Town. That one I'll never forget.
It was a good opportunity for me, one that changed my life for the better, and I'm grateful for the fact that I got an opportunity to actually be a part of IMWA because I learned a lot of things. I learned about myself. I learned to accept the person that I am. I learned to believe in myself, and I learned to trust in myself. And mostly, I learned to work with other people, to learn from other people, and I felt like I had another family from outside because whenever I had challenges, I knew that there were people with me who were gonna work with me. I was never alone when I was in IMUR, and it was a good support structure that I needed in my life to overcome all the obstacles that I had from high school. I got to meet people who were raised by single parents like myself, and I got to hear their challenges, their struggles, and seeing them being successful in life. It also gave me that hope that I can do it. If this person did it, it means that I can do it. I can also do it. And it also gave me more strength, more resilience, more determination, even when I had to do anything that I put my mind to it. So
has really been one of the amazing things that has ever happened to me because it has really had a huge impact in my life and has made me see a world with a better perspective and have a positive mind, and it has helped me to achieve a lot of goals that I've set for myself because we have been practiced every now and then that we have to prepare ourselves for the future and a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Zumele and I'm powerful. I'm going to share with you today how IMUI has helped me to be who I am today. First of all, I was shy. I couldn't talk to people and I didn't have a confidence. But right now, I'm not shy anymore and I'm so confident. Let's start about when IMUI started. I didn't talk to people and I didn't know who I wanted to be and I didn't know who I am. I didn't know what I'm strong in. But now, I know who I am. I know who the real Rorsang is and I know who I want to become. We are powerful. Who we are and who will become is limited only by our beliefs. Our past did not define us and our circumstances do not define us. We all are present in our future. With hard work, determination, and a focus, our dreams will be our reality.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'm going to send it back to your MC for this evening, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Sam, Summer, Misha, Betty, and the rest of her amazing students who tuned in with us virtually. Relebohile, Nkosi. That was absolutely beautiful. We're so thrilled that this panel and film screening is supporting Misha, who you may have recognized as one of the many faces from the movie A Towering Task, as well as her organization, I Am, We Are. We cannot wait to continue following along and supporting their journey. And thank you to each and every single one of you who donated as part of today's event. It really means a lot. Now, without any further ado, ladies, gentlemen, non-binary folks, however you identify, let's dig into our main event, a panel discussion on racial justice in the Peace Corps. If all of the panelists could please turn their videos on now, that would be fantastic. We have 6 tremendous panelists here from South Africa to the United States, each of whom will be sharing their unique experiences, either with race and inclusion in the Peace Corps or through other work in international exchange programs or the international development space more broadly. Remember, if you are tuning in with us today, we want to hear your questions for the panelists. So you can drop any questions that you have into the Q&A chat box. We know there's the chat going where you all are introducing yourself. So great to see so many familiar names and faces, including my parents. Hi, Mom and Dad. But if you guys have questions for us today, please go ahead and put them in that Q&A chat box feature. We're gonna let each of the panelists speak, share their perspectives, share their experiences, and then we'll have a time after each panelist has shared to go through and answer your questions. So please send those all to us using that Q&A chat box feature. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Darnesha Tabor. Darnesha Tabor served as a community HIV outreach specialist with the United States Peace Corps in South Africa from 2018 to 2020. Her work centered around supporting local counterparts in program implementation of a variety of health initiatives targeting youth and their caregivers. During this time, she also served as chair of Peace Corps South Africa's Diversity Committee, which provided volunteers with supplemental resources and training to expand their multicultural awareness and cultural humility. Darnesha is a native of St. Louis, Missouri, earned her bachelor's degree in health sciences from the University of Missouri, and after graduating, she interned with the U.S. House of Representatives and worked for National Head Start Association. Darnesha is currently based in Atlanta, Georgia, while pursuing a master's in development practice to support her to radically shift neocolonialist systems. Darnesha works as a program assistant at the Task Force for Global Health and as a food safety evaluation intern at the Global Growers Network, supporting the ongoing development and execution of culturally relevant evaluation frameworks, resources, and trainings for refugee and Black farmers. Darnesha, as a Black American woman, tell us about your experiences of race during your Peace Corps service, particularly given the incredibly unique racial context of your home country, the United country, South Africa. What were some of your biggest lessons learned around race and equity as a result of your time here in South Africa that you took back and are actually trying to now apply to the American context?
Thanks, Nicole. Before I start, I just want to say hello, Dumelang, Tobela, Sambonani, Ninjani, and thank you, Nicole, for such a warm welcome. As you shared, I just got back from the Peace Corps in March of 2020, so I'm kind of still unpacking my experience because it's so fresh, and then just adapting to this new normal that was caused by the pandemic. So I identify as a Black woman, and I feel incredibly grateful to be Black because as a people, we're incredibly strong, resilient, talent, and to keep it brief, we're amazing. As a Black woman, race played a huge role throughout my Peace Corps service. And unfortunately, growing up in the US, racism and microaggressions in predominantly white spaces is not a new thing for me. For context, I served during the Trump presidency at a time when his rhetoric really emboldened many racist and bigoted people to commit hate crimes against Black and brown people. And while I understand that Peace Corps is apolitical, it was incredibly disheartening for an organization that claims to value peace to not boldly speak out against injustices. When I initially arrived in South Africa, I had this romanticized idea of what it would be to be a Black American returning to the African continent, which was a little naive on my part. And to take from Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, being a Black American on the African continent can cause a feeling of sadness, of being unrooted in both lands. And that's definitely a feeling that I felt throughout my service. As Nicole shares, apartheid ended in South Africa in 1994. And to give you a comparison, the US Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, which is a little over 50 years ago. And Black people are still being murdered in the street in the US. So I say that to show that even when racist systems fall, the racism, oppression, and trauma still remains in the country. So the healing takes time. And as a Black volunteer, I really faced this in South Africa. I was subject to harmful stereotypes from of Black Americans from some host country staff and host country nationals, and also white volunteers in my cohort, some of them using the N-words and other microaggressions. And when I arrived at my first site, my supervisor being disappointed because I was not a white volunteer. I later had a site change, and the community where I served, the majority of my service was incredibly welcoming and kind. And I think it's important to note that. I also want to note that there were some real gems in the Peace Corps country staff whose support really got me through my service. The people that I worked with and the many people in the community where I lived through apartheid. And as I said earlier, healing takes time. So the lingering impacts really affected my service, from entering stores with white volunteers. And as a Black person, my bags were checked by store owners while white volunteers were allowed to freely enter. Also, there was a higher expectation of a Black volunteer to learn the language faster, know how to do chores, and know cultural norms simply because I was Black, and that's something that I struggle with. In my opinion, Peace Corps training that comes down from HQ is really geared towards white volunteers who identify as white, cis, and cisgendered volunteers, and does little to incorporate Black volunteers and volunteers of color into that conversation. I think the training really failed to address that identity is intersectional. Myself and other volunteers on the diversity committee fought to include anti-racist training throughout service for volunteers and PC staff to continually foster an environment where we were working to fight against the inequities and injustices in the communities that we were serving. However, I feel that this training needs to be institutionalized throughout Peace Corps. And I also think it's unfair to put the onus on volunteers of color who are also navigating their own service to educate other volunteers on anti-racism. If Peace Corps is really dedicated to being anti-racist, they need to put the money there, hire professionals who do that work. And also, in my opinion, starting that training when a volunteer arrives in country is too late. It needs to be started at the recruitment level. And because if the first time a volunteer is discussing privilege and savior complex is when they arrive in country, it's incredibly harmful to place that volunteer in a community. So when I reflect on my service, it's definitely filled with more joy than pain. But I feel that Peace Corps continually fails at its goal to meet the needs of community. And the organization is very volunteer focused, with community almost at the afterthought. So I'm currently pursuing my master's in development practice to analyze and learn the skills on how to improve development practice. And I think as an RPCV, it's my role to call out these injustices and address the inequities that Peace Corps continues to foster if we're really going to try to answer what Peace Corps' role is in the 21st century. I'm sorry, I went over time a little bit, but thank you.
No, don't be sorry at all, Darnesha. It is our absolute pleasure to be able to hear your voice, listen to your experiences, and sort of reflect with you around your time in the Peace Corps. This feeling of being sort of uprooted in both places, in the United States and upon your return to the African continent, which so many of us feel like should be this really celebratory moment, and then sometimes isn't. And then based on some of the experiences we have with our fellow volunteers, really really doesn't support that. So thank you so much, Darnesha. We look forward to hearing more from you during our Q&A a little bit later. So everyone, please remember to post your questions for Darnesha, for myself, for any of the panelists into the chat box. All right, team, moving right along. I am thrilled to next up introduce my friend, my peer here in Cape Town, South Africa, with me, Ronel Stevens. Ronel Stevens is an international education specialist with over 15 years experience in the South African public tertiary sector. Ronel is a master's in laws graduate specializing in human rights law, a child protection officer, and she focuses on education, NGO impact analysis, and intercultural learning through engagement, specifically around bridging the gaps that exist between academia and local communities. Ronel is a Black South African feminist and a savvy manager with in-depth knowledge and understanding of international higher education systems, from implementation to coordination to design of both programmatic and academic credit-bearing courses. She has a demonstrated history of successfully working with university students from all over the globe, specifically with academic institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa, North America, and Europe on short-term exchanges and internships on the African continent. Ronel, the American conversation about race is largely that, American. Talk to us about the current South African conversation about race. And furthermore, as we look to you and the rest of the folks on this panel to be the architects of international exchange and peace building programs like the Peace Corps, what do we have to keep in mind to ensure that we are building inclusive, actively anti-racist programming for people to travel and be of service around the world?
Thank you so much, Nicole, and good evening, good morning, good day to everyone around the world. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ronel, and thank you so much, Nicole, for that wonderful introduction. But I think that me following Darnesha, that I couldn't have asked for a better segue. I work in the international higher education, but personally, I'm my mother's eldest daughter. I come from a line of very strong women. I gave birth to an even stronger young woman who's 8 years old and Nicole's best friend, obviously. But my kind of interest in the world and my interest and my political understanding came very, very late, actually, because I could never find the words to describe the experience that I was having. I thought everything around me was wonderful. I had a great upbringing and I never questioned anything because there was never, a thing to point out what was different between what I was experiencing and those who were immediately around me, which later on I come to understand and realize in my politics classes when we were dissecting communities I came from, to realize that, the thing that I was experiencing and the reason why I wasn't questioning anything is because I was part of like that systemic space that was kept. I was, I grew up in a colored community on the Cape Flats where people didn't expect us to do anything more than becoming like a teller at a bank. That was like, the ideal job. So to think about going to study, to think about like pushing boundaries, to think about even questioning, politically where you come from, or even to speak about your history and your family history, it was, a non-thing that was happening in the space. And I'm only saying that to tie together this idea of like trauma and pain that doesn't stop when a democratic order is being brought into a country or into a system. And I think that's what many people had expected, or the kind of the hope was that once we move from apartheid to democracy, that things will immediately just change. Yes, the wonderful thing is what people like me, I was allowed to go to a university that my grandparents and like my family could only dream about. And so just to kind of pull that part together, that has really kind of like turned a curve in my life, because I had to start thinking about what is it that I want to do and how is it that I'm going to bring purpose to my life as I move forward. So in international higher education, just to throw out a really quick stat, if you think about the student that studies abroad, for every 35, international student that comes across, which is our demographic, the white blonde girl with blue eyes, only one Black student with the same demographic studies abroad. And that's completely shocking. So in my, starting years, I always would do let's bring students, let's have them engage in communities, because that's great. But we never really asked the questions about what are they doing when they come here? How devastating are their beliefs and their practices when they move into our communities? How do our communities respond to them when they arrive, because they're so used to dealing with white volunteers? What happens if a Black volunteer comes? What is the connection between South Africa and the rest of the continent? How do we connect with the diaspora? And so you can already tell a lot of my practices came from asking many questions and then trying to push boundaries. And this idea of decolonization is not a thing that just like happens once you have moved into a space, but really this idea of decolonization should be one that guides us as we start thinking about where are we moving in the organizations that we find ourselves, and how are we going to be asking these hard questions and equally doing the work towards making the changes in these very difficult conversations that needs to be had. And so just to kind of finalize my thoughts is to say that the process of decolonization is one that is very slowly starting. Black Lives Matters, Roads Must Fall, all these actions that's happening around the world. There needs to be more of these, and there needs to be a lot more conversations about how people are accountable for their actions as well. And so I'll leave it at that for now, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ronel. It's so tremendous to hear a little bit more about your background and your growing up and being part of that group that nobody expected anything from. And to see all of your tremendous success and everything that you have now is just incredible. And you're, a role model for all the other little young girls all around the world who are coming right after you, including your beautiful daughter, Aquila. I also thought it was quite interesting how you sort of mentioned, the stats around international students and who's coming, to do these programs. You mentioned the girl with, the white girl with the blonde hair and the blue eyes, which was similarly a quote that came up in the movie, A Towering Task, which for me is a perfect segue now into our next panelist. So thank you, Ronel. Next up, folks, on our panel today, we have Alana DeJoseph, the director of the film that many of you watched with us yesterday, A Towering Task, the story of the Peace Corps. Alana DeJoseph has worked in video and film production for nearly 40 years and has worn many hats across the industry as producer, director, videographer, editor, and even actress. But her heart has always been in documentaries. Between 2003 and 2013, she was associate producer of the PBS documentaries The Greatest Good and Green Fire. It was from 1992 to 1994 when Alana DeJoseph served as the Peace Corps volunteer advising on enterprise development in Mali. Being a returned Peace Corps volunteer helped Alana understand that as walls are being built and nations are turning inward, a comprehensive documentary of this globally engaged American agency was urgently needed. In 2013, Alana began working on the first feature documentary about the history of the Peace Corps, A Towering Task. On September 22nd, 2019, the film premiered to a full house at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And in December 2020, just last year, Alana DeJoseph won the Best Director Award in the feature documentary category at the Indo Global International Film Festival in Mumbai. Alana, your film greatly details the history and founding of the Peace Corps and the unique roles it's played in the United States and across the globe over the years. If there's one thing that you want all of us to take away from the movie, A Towering Task, what is it and why? And given the myriad of seriously pressing issues that the world faces today, racial injustice, climate change, a pandemic, populism, global migration, the list goes on. I also have to ask you, what in your opinion is the role of the Peace Corps today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Nicole. Wonderful questions, wonderful introductions. Thank you to Friends of South Africa for having me. It's such an honor to be on this panel. And with your first question about what is the one thing people should take away, as a documentarian about history, I think there are a million little things that need to be taken away because the history has changed so much over time. But the title of the documentary was really important to us, A Towering Task. And the Towering Task title, of course, came from the white paper that Warren Wiggins and Bill Josephson wrote about the idea of what Peace Corps should look like in the first place. So the founding of the agency, that it even existed, was so unlikely, and it was a towering task to make it happen. And I think understanding that creating the Peace Corps and maintaining it and keeping it relevant continue to be towering tasks. And as a RPCV community, as a Peace Corps community, we have an incredible responsibility to push the Peace Corps to be not just the best it can be, but also what was initially envisioned in many ways. Because Peace Corps' founding came straight out of the Cold War era. The people who founded the Peace Corps many of them had fought in World War II. All of them had lived World War II. And so for them, the mission, world peace and friendship, which sounds kind of nebulous and kumbaya to us today, was incredibly tangible for them. It was very, very specific. And you talked about the interconnectedness of the world. So at that time, that's what they saw as the interconnectedness of the world, was warring nations. And luckily, they were prescient to see that the people-to-people level connection was just as important as the government level connection, and understanding the rest of the world was important. And so coming out of an era of the ugly American, where as Americans, we didn't, and in many ways still don't really understand the rest of the world very well, how incredibly important it is to educate Americans that it isn't just America. America isn't the best and only country in the world, and that we can learn from each other. So that towering task effort of creating the agency and then maintaining it over the era is incredibly important. And then if you see that as an internal thing, the internal part of it, of course, of making it adapt to what is needed over time. The external thing is the mission of what it does. What is the programming? What Peace Corps, what should Peace Corps volunteers do in the first place, and how do they avoid being white saviors or reinforcing neocolonialism? So in terms of looking to the future, I still look to the past because I'm just stuck in thinking about the past for the last 8 years on this documentary. And it's that founding, what was so important to the founders was that the Peace Corps would be a flexible agency. They did not want a stodgy bureaucracy. The reason they wanted it to be independent from the State Department, independent from USAID, was that they wouldn't get the bureaucrats that had been sitting in the same places with the same opinions, with the same colonialist attitude at the time. They wanted a fresh perspective. And so who they brought in, they brought so many people from outside of government in. They were looking for the leading thinkers. They were asking the leading thinkers who the future leading thinkers would be to bring in. The founders, Shriver and Harris Wofford, were steeped in the civil rights movement. So right away from the beginning, they wanted something new and something that was equitable, they understood that world peace meant social justice, that was one could not exist without the other. In terms of how to make it happen, the logistics of it, the internal structures have been incredibly hard for any organization really, but for the Peace Corps, because of its independence, which was the advantage of keeping it nimble, it also bogged it down in some ways, because so when the State Department does a change, then that affects every agency under the umbrella of the State Department, and everybody changes at once. Peace Corps is out there on its own. It's an independent agency in the executive branch, and for it to make its changes can feel incredibly difficult. And sometimes the agency becomes, reluctant. And Peace Corps has a 5-year rule. You can't work for the Peace Corps for longer than 5 years, and you have to go away at least 5 years before you can come back, which creates all kinds of reinventing the wheel scenarios and forgetting lessons learned and such, which create some challenges for the agency. It keeps it young and fresh and allows a lot of RPCVs to come in, but it also has some drawbacks.
Alana, we're just about at time, so if you just want to say sort of your...
So towering task, take with you that it was not easy to create this agency. It's fragile, we could lose it very easily. Let's fight to make it a better agency.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alana, for those reflections. You have an absolutely tremendous film here. And it was indeed a towering task to make the Peace Corps happen. And I similarly think it will be a towering task to ensure that the agency remains, committed to anti-racism and promoting equity, not only across its volunteers, but across the world where so many folks are living and working and engaged with Peace Corps programs. So thank you so much for those reflections today. All right, folks, moving right along. I am excited to introduce our next panelist, Glenn Blumhorst, President and CEO of the National Peace Corps Association, NPCA, a 501c3 enterprise at the center of a community of more than 240,000 individuals who share the Peace Corps experience. Founded in 1979 and headquartered in Washington, D.C., NPCA's mission is to champion lifelong commitment to Peace Corps ideals. During his tenure, Glenn has led NPCA's historic transformation from a dues-based alumni association to a community-driven social impact organization. Prior to joining NPCA, Glenn served for 18 years with ACDI/VOCA, most recently leading the establishment and expansion of the organization's worldwide community stabilization and development practice area as managing director. He also served as country representative and chief of party on several major USAID-funded projects throughout Central and South America. Glenn's work has taken him to over 65 countries and enabled his Spanish language fluency, and he launched it all by serving 3 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala. Glenn, you have had an incredibly long and fruitful career in international development, both in the public and private sectors. Throughout your tenure across the development space in a variety of different roles and contexts, what are some of the positive changes that you've seen supporting inclusion, whether that be related to race specifically or gender or any other pressing theme around improved global equity? And then Glenn, when we think about organizations that support Peace Corps, organizations like NPCA, RPCVs addressing racism, Decolonizing Peace Corps, even our hosts for today's event, Friends of South Africa, what is their role in holding Peace Corps accountable to equity, not only in the United States, but across the globe in the many countries where Peace Corps has national interests?
Well, thank you first and foremost, Nicole, for that fabulous introduction, and just to Friends of South Africa for the invitation to be here with you. And it's very much an honor to be a part of such an impressive panel of individuals who have committed their lifetimes to service around the world. And thank you and congratulations to Friends of South Africa for doing this event today. And I'm just so impressed in the 4 years that you've been established, how much you've done and how far along you've come. It's amazing, and congratulations on organizing such a great Friends of South Africa group. I also want to really just thank you for your support of Misha Robinson's organization, I Am, We Are, and the great work that she's doing. Thank you for dedicating some of your proceeds to that cause as well. I'm really just a development practitioner. I'm not an expert, so despite all the projects I've worked on and programs I've been involved in, I'm just a farm kid from Missouri who served in the Peace Corps and then decided to serve the world in any capacity that I could and continue what I learned in the Peace Corps. So when it comes to the work that's being done in the international development arena, I would first and foremost say that it's certainly helpful to look and see, maybe in the USAID community or in the development community, what has happened, what are programs and how things have been evolving over the many years that those programs have been working. Certainly, I've seen some positive changes in supporting inclusion. These include inclusion strategies, for example, woven into project implementation, metrics that help measure how well we're doing to promote equity and inclusion. And then there's even entire programs devoted to addressing equity and inclusion. Myself, I worked on a major project in Colombia that was designed for that purpose. But 2020 was such a pivotal year, and it was very disruptive to the status quo. And we live now in a changed world, and this has been a tremendous paradigm shift. So I think really looking forward is as much as important as looking back on what things have happened. And And really, there's so much work to do. Last year, we hosted this summit called Peace Corps Connect for the Future, and we heard the collective voice of the Peace Corps community say that the Peace Corps in this environment has to be retooled and reshaped for the future. Those findings are on our website and the report that's been published on our website. But first and foremost, we heard that the community says that the Peace Corps community itself must be a leader in addressing racism, and that the Peace Corps agency must stand by that community and leverage it for impact and bring about the changes in the agency that need to occur. And we also all agree that right now, and I think we've heard this throughout all the comments made previously, that this is the time, this is the moment for the Peace Corps agency to make that dramatic change. So there were over 290 recommendations and ideas in that report. It really is a roadmap to the future and the changes that we want to see. How can we make that happen? Mel Foote, president of Constituency for Africa and a frequent panelist on many events, he says it's best, I think. He says, don't agonize, organize. And that's really our role here, myself included, and all of us collectively and individually. We have an important role to play. I think since that summit last year, we've seen a number of conversations, panels, and other types of events that have dealt with these issues, and this ongoing conversation in our community about racial justice and equity is so important. What we really need to do, though, is really get engaged and involved. And we're really just getting started. We've got a long way to go, but all of us as returned Peace Corps volunteers, as affiliate groups, or just loosely organized groups of RPCVs or friends or family or whoever we are, we need to work toward those recommendations. And that means in many ways holding Peace Corps accountable and advocating to the Peace Corps itself and to Peace Corps leadership for the changes. I think we've seen some things here. I'm pleased to see Darlene Grant taking the leadership role in the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. And I was pleased to see Acting Director Carol Spahn's remarks, I think it was on Thursday, reflecting that the Peace Corps agency is listening to the individual and collective voice of our community. But I just would like to say we all have a responsibility or role here. Advocate, get involved in advocacy on these issues. When necessary, we will go to Capitol Hill to legislate changes that need to occur. And it will take all of our community to get behind those changes and make them happen. So look forward to hearing from all of you. Myself, I hope you can contact me and let me know your thoughts and priorities and what's important to the Peace Corps community in this work that we have to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I think one of the things that really resonated with me about what you shared is this sort of commitment to service. And I think that is, an absolutely tremendous characteristic of everyone who is affiliated with the Peace Corps, or even everyone on this panel, everyone in the chat box. And so when we think about your quote, don't agonize, organize. It's those of us who have that commitment and that passion for service, who hopefully will be organizing to make sure that the Peace Corps is held accountable for promoting equity, in the way that you shared, in summits like this and your Peace Corps Connect Summit, this panel today. These are all critical components of that organizing. So thank you. Next up, everybody, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Michelle Choy. Michelle Choy is the co-chair of RPCVs Addressing Racism, supporting the broader Peace Corps community to reimagine a more inclusive Peace Corps. Michelle is a first-generation Chinese-American daughter of immigrants who has been working in global health and development for 15 years. She has her bachelor's from Barnard College and her master's from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And Michelle served as a health volunteer in Peace Corps Tanzania from 2004 to 2006. Since then, Michelle has worked with international NGOs in the US, Malawi, and Tanzania. Michelle, far more often than not, the conversation around diversity and inclusion and race in particular is largely Black and white, but the conversation around inclusion needs to span the vast array of identities that people hold. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience as an Asian American volunteer serving in the Peace Corps? And then talk to me about what strategies you and your team at RPCVs Addressing Racism are employing to amplify the global conversation on anti-racism and inclusion.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you so much to Friends of South Africa. I'm so grateful to be here with you all today. So yeah, thanks for those amazing questions. I would say to address your first one, growing up in New York City as like a first generation Chinese American, I definitely had a mix of experiences, both in having the privilege of being this model minority, but also very frequently being othered, which may not come as a surprise to folks on this call, given like the very long history of exclusion of the Chinese community in the US and also the recent focus on anti-Asian racism. So going into Peace Corps, I really wasn't sure what to expect. So during my time in Tanzania as a foreigner, or Mzungu, as we say in Swahili, similar to my experiences in the US, I was at times treated with tremendous privilege for the color of my skin. But as an Asian American, I was also frequently questioned about my Americanness. And so I felt like an outsider almost among outsiders when folks in Tanzania would ask me, oh, how are things in China? Or question how I could possibly look the way I do and be from the US. I think, you know, to Ronel's earlier point, I didn't look like the Americans that people would see on TV who were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or even some of the African Americans that were shown on like MTV or TV at the time. And so I think that it was really interesting that I also didn't realize that there was a large Chinese government and contractor presence in East Africa, which also influenced a lot of stereotypes and perspectives about Asians and people of Asian descent. Additionally, when I chatted with fellow PCVs in my cohort, I realized I had a really different experience being intersectional identities, being a female and also being Asian American. And for those of you who saw the film last night, you may have also noted that there were very few PCVs pictured who look like me. And so I think that, you know, it's taken me some time to reflect on, you know, both the privileges that I had as an Asian American volunteer, but also some of the other experiences that might be different from other PCVs. And I think that that is part of what has motivated me to do some of this work. And so as Nicole mentioned earlier, the group that I have the privilege of working with is called RPCVs Addressing Racism. This is a group that began last summer after the death of George Floyd and came as a result of a virtual town hall held by RPCVs of Washington, D.C. RAR Plus, our group, hopes to see Peace Corps represent the diversity of the US and also be inclusive of PCVs of all identities. And it's a space that we have held and created as, you know, an opportunity for volunteers to reflect and learn from each other. We are building a coalition of other grassroots organizations and groups, mostly who are identifying themselves and organizing on social media. We're looking into those groups who are interested in these issues and other issues around racial and social justice issues. We're also working with groups such as NPCA to better understand how to advocate for these more inclusive practices at the agency. And we recognize that there's a lot of important work that's already being done in many Peace Corps countries around this. And we want to see how some of this work can be amplified and also shared among other Peace Corps countries, and to see anti-racism done in a way that's not just performative by Peace Corps, but is really truly institutionalized, as some of the other panelists have mentioned. And we recognize that our voices are stronger together, and we want to leverage this important moment in both Peace Corps history and, you know, history of the US to reimagine a stronger and more inclusive agency for all. So yeah, thank you, Nicole. I'll end here.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for reflecting on some of your experiences in the Peace Corps, those nuances around sort of what the country that you're going to, their perspectives or perceptions of what people might be like, whether they're from the US, or you mentioned sort of like the very strong sort of, Asian presence across East Africa. You know, those are the types of things that we're completely unaware of and unprepared for when we go into Peace Corps service. And I think thinking about all the work that RPCVs Addressing Racism is doing, trainings and support meetings, things like that. When I think about some of Darnesha's earlier comments around how do we prepare these Peace Corps volunteers, to know more about diversity, equity, inclusion, and these things even before they go to service, they go to these countries. I see a lot of synergy and opportunities for RPCVs Addressing Racism to be able to host some of those fora, and even with the support of groups like Friends of South Africa and PCA, et cetera. So thank you, Michelle, for sharing your experiences and highlighting that for us. Okay, last but certainly not least, I'm excited to introduce our final panelist. We have Lindsay Allen. Lindsay Allen is the co-founder and co-lead organizer of Decolonizing Peace Corps, an organization consisting of mostly RPCVs of color that seeks to counter the overwhelmingly positive narrative surrounding Peace Corps and critically analyze the organization from an intersectional anti-imperialist perspective. Lindsay was born and raised in Upper Marlboro, a small suburb just outside of DC in Maryland. She has her bachelor's degree in American Studies, and she served as a Peace Corps volunteer for 10 months in Mozambique until the COVID-19 evacuation in March of last year. She is currently in the process of applying to get her master's degree in anthropology or sociology. And Lindsay loves her friends, her family, reading, YouTube, animals, and radical politics. Lindsay, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges to racial justice and equity that exist within the Peace Corps today? And what's next for the Peace Corps? What role does the Peace Corps play, or does it not play, as a tool for a more inclusive world?
Thank you so much, Nicole, for introducing me. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all, and thank you for having me here and listening with an open mind and heart. I would first like to say that I'm a Black American woman. I am a descendant of enslaved Africans who were brought to the Americas. I have an American passport, I speak English, I have class privilege, I am a cis woman, I have lighter skin, but I am also a Black woman, and within me exists both privilege and marginalization. What does racial justice look like within Peace Corps? Racial justice is more than just adding more people of color to Peace Corps or simply making Peace Corps a safe space for volunteers of color. Racial justice is the system of Peace Corps good for all people of color globally? To the people of color that live in the communities that volunteers live in, the reality is that we don't get to decide what justice is for another community. We can only listen. When I was in Mozambique, I saw many things that made me uncomfortable. I saw the immense amount of privileges that volunteers had, including myself. Be it as simple as being able to take a break from life at site to go to the nearest city and stay in a nice hotel for a weekend, having rules like no riding motorcycles that protected volunteers from the lives that local people had to live every day, or being perceived as automatically an expert or an asset simply because we are white or associated with whiteness. Peace Corps warned us that this would happen. I realized only much later that Peace Corps only cares to acknowledge these privileges, but does absolutely nothing about the root problems that cause volunteers to have these privileges in the first place. Peace Corps is only interested in maintaining the status quo in the countries and communities they work in, and not in supporting them and making radical change. The reality is you cannot do what's best for a government that has a long history of imperialism and exploitation of the global South, and what's best for local communities at the same time. Peace Corps would like for local people to conclude that because this volunteer is my friend and has my best interest at heart, that the US government is also my friend and has my best interest at heart. This could not be further from the truth. The US government should be focusing on paying reparations to the people it has harmed through its imperialism, the indigenous peoples of the US, Black Americans, and the people of the global South. There is little to no acknowledgement on their part of the harm that has been done. The real question is, who are we to have a Peace Corps? I have been asking myself lately, what pulled me to volunteer in Mozambique when there are more than enough issues in my own community in the US to learn about and help find solutions to? Was it because I'm Black and I wanted to connect with my ancestry that was robbed from me? Was it because there's something exotic and interesting about volunteering in another country and culture? Was it because I actually wanted to help people? Or was it because I was only thinking about myself? I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't travel, nor that cultural exchange is a bad thing. I'm just wondering why many of us Americans feel the need to make a career out of solving problems that we have very little knowledge of in a community that is not our own. On behalf of Decolonizing Peace Corps and all those who have supported our mission, we believe that there is no room for Peace Corps in the future. The Peace Corps should play no role in making this world safer and more beautiful for all of us to live in. We would like to see systems that are for and by host country nationals, not systems where the 20 people who work in the office are Mozambican, but the top 3 officials are American and often white, where the power doesn't lie in headquarters, which exists thousands of miles away. We want to see host country nationals be in complete control over how their community develops. We want them to be able to receive help if they want it, help that does not have ulterior motives, that does not come with the baggage and agenda of the US government. But Peace Corps isn't going anywhere anytime soon. International development is not apolitical like Peace Corps wants it to be, and it never will be. It exists because of the colonial systems that were and continue to be forced upon peoples of the Global South. But getting rid of Peace Corps without a deep understanding of the harmful ideals that Peace Corps was born out of will do nothing. We still are not ready to expand our definition of racial justice to include American imperialism. We aren't ready to give up this program that we have all benefited from for 60 years, a program that connected us to a country and a people that changed our lives, including mine.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Was there another sentence, or have you wrapped?
That's it.
That's it. That's where we're at. I think you have done a tremendous job of highlighting some of the deepest, darkest insecurities of the United States Peace Corps. Thinking about the sort of the founding of the organization, host country local staff who are plentiful in country, but who don't make the decisions because headquarters does. These are some of the things that we have to talk about when we want to have a conversation about what equity looks like from the Peace Corps, and whether or not that's even possible. So thank you so much, Lindsay, for shedding light on some of these things that oftentimes in these sorts of fora and panels, people are frankly too afraid to talk about. So we appreciate you sort of bringing that to the forefront. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody on this panel, we have heard some radically inspiring, radically different, radically bold ideas around the future of the Peace Corps, and demanding racial justice and equity from international organizations in the modern world, and particularly from those coming out of the United States. I want to thank each panelist who shared their unique and lived experiences with all of us today. It can be incredibly challenging to have conversations around race, particularly for those of us who identify as BIPOC, because this is such a sensitive topic, and it informs how we each move through the world. So we really honor your bravery and your voices today. And with that being said, I'm going to move it over to the audience. So thank you to those of you who have been submitting questions for our esteemed panelists today. The Friends of South Africa team has been collecting your questions, and I'm going to start to share some of them now. So I might be directing these specifically to an individual panelist, or just opening it up to the group. So give me just one moment. Let me toggle my screen here and figure out where to start. So many fantastic questions here. Okay. Let me start with, sorry, I'm looking through here. There's so many questions. This is actually awesome. Okay. Let me start with a question directed towards Ronel, our South African panelist today. This is coming from Jacqueline Brown. Ronel, what ways do you think students or people can best prepare themselves when going abroad? And I think this is a little bit of a simple question, but when you think about the Peace Corps that's sending people from the United States into countries that and communities that they're unfamiliar with, would love to hear your perspective and thoughts on the preparation and the planning.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, and I tried answering it in the Q&A, the text. I would really say that, yes, we can keep our organizations accountable for creating spaces where people can actually find the words, learn more about decolonization, all those things and what it means. But I also think as individual students, and I say this to myself as well, when I go and I visit the space, I can't just go into the space blindly. I need to be able to learn enough about that culture or enough about that space in order for me to comfortably move in that space, but also to know what are some of the issues that exist there, how do I connect to those, but also to ask the big question about why am I going? I think Lindsay had said it all in her kind of wrapping up statement about, why is it that I'm even trying to come onto a Peace Corps? Why is it I'm trying to study abroad? Why is it that I'm not looking to my own community? Or is this an opportunity for me to really learn outside of my context what happens and how to apply in order to go back home and to apply it back there? So I think my quick response is just that we need to, as individuals, take responsibility for learning more about the spaces we are visiting, but we also need to keep our organizations accountable for creating those spaces for conversation prior to your arrival, so to not create very toxic situations when you come, and you ask questions or do actions that's actually very counter to what happens in that space.
Absolutely. I appreciate that feedback, Ronel, and some really sort of insightful points there. I think I'll also actually just sort of pass this over to Glenn. Actually, when you're thinking about these, hearing this feedback from volunteers, hearing this feedback from all the different sort of people and groups that you're working with through NPCA or through any of the other Peace Corps organizations, what is the thought? What is the feedback on having the training? How do we prepare people to go abroad?
Yeah, thank you. I think first and foremost, what we're hearing is that the training has to be completely different. It's, and we've heard this, I think, from a number of panelists, that the training has been historically designed toward a particular type of volunteer, and the training needs to be completely retooled and reshaped for a new environment. And obviously, National Peace Corps Association does not, involve ourselves in the management of Peace Corps itself, but the voices of the community do, I think, drive those sort of changes. And the folks, the individuals that we see in this panel, for example, would make great trainer leaders and leading that, providing that leadership for that training. So by ensuring that we have diversity in our leadership at all levels, throughout the agency, throughout our organizations as well, I think that we'll be able to train better for the volunteers of the future. And I would, again, the onus is on the agency, I believe, to bring about those changes. And as we've said, now is the time for those changes to occur. I can't speak to what is happening in the field, in terms of what changes are being made for programming and training in the field. I hope we'll hear soon about those changes, and I hope to hear about changes in the way volunteers are being recruited, as well as the programs that are in place.
Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate your insights and feedback there. As we continue to think about how to make these training programs, whether they come from Peace Corps formally or from community groups, like ours that just seek to support the Peace Corps experience. My next question comes from Becky Turpin, who shared, from Darnesha. Darnesha stated that the Peace Corps is volunteer-focused, community as an afterthought. Becky shares, "This is what strikes me most as I engage with Peace Corps communications and publication." So I'm gonna throw this over to both Darnesha and to Lindsay. How can and should the Peace Corps center their partners in country as they evaluate themselves and evolve?
I guess I can go first. So for me, communities can be more centered. I think it starts at the top level. So, and someone just said a good point, diversity is not anti-racism. So I think that Peace Corps likes to preach diversity, but you can have diversity, but also not be inclusive. But to go back to my other point, I think it starts at the top down, like who is Peace Corps receiving its funding for? That's who's setting the agenda. And I think in order if the organization is to radically shift to center communities, then that needs to change. Who is controlling the funding of Peace Corps? Who's leading the organization? Lindsay brought up a very good point of the capital offices at the Capitol being led by predominantly white people, and the host country staff is below them. So I just think that the whole structure of the organization needs to change, and it doesn't need to be like a marketing campaign of like Peace Corps is now more diversity inclusive and with screenshots of people in communities. It needs to be intentional. Funding needs to shift, leadership needs to change if we really are going to be anti-racist in the work.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say how Peace Corps can focus on communities when the basic structure of Peace Corps is sending thousands of volunteers around the world and like investing their budget and their money in those volunteers. And volunteers have to fundraise or whatever for that money to reach the community. But the basic structure of Peace Corps is set up to center volunteers. So it's really hard to say how, unless Peace Corps were to actually do what they do for us and have trainings and pay people to do the work that we do, it's really hard to say how can the community not be an afterthought when that's really the basic structure of Peace Corps.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Darnesha. This is something that I oftentimes, it's always Peace Corps volunteers, Peace Corps volunteers, Peace Corps volunteers. It's like, what about these tremendous counterparts who we literally could not serve, were it not for them and their hospitality and their generosity in these schools and these clinics and these organizations who open up to us. How do we create a structure where that cross-cultural exchange is valued, honored, not just on behalf of the Peace Corps volunteers, but on behalf of the counterparts in local communities as well. So I appreciate your thoughts and feedback there. Okay, next question. I'm going to select. Okay, so I have another question here. I'm hoping that perhaps Michelle, Alana, and Glenn might have a little insight into this one, or can at least speak to some of your experiences. So the question is, with the new Peace Corps administration, is there a clear path forward, or do you see a clear path forward for folding racial justice focused elements into the pre-service training for volunteers? And of course, if you don't have sort of direct insight into what PCHQ is thinking, that's okay. But based on some of the conversations you've had or are hearing, we just got if you're on the Peace Corps listserv, we just got an email about racial justice from the new acting director, Carol Swan. So let me throw that to Michelle first. So thinking about how do we put these elements of racial justice, of training, DEI understanding into pre-service training.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. As we all know, Peace Corps is an agency of the US government. And I think that from hearing and being on talks with previous Peace Corps headquarters directors who've had from the top, from sort of the president himself in the past, this directive to be more inclusive, to center racial justice, such as under President Obama, that sort of had the ability to kind of flow downwards. And I think that, as we probably all are aware of, during the last president's time, that definitely had a complete 360. And so all of us, and I think in the Peace Corps community and those of us working on these issues, are really hopeful that President Biden and Vice President Harris is really going to have a little bit more of an understanding of the damage that has been done in the previous administration, and also move forward with selecting a Peace Corps director who is going to be focused on these issues. But I definitely think that Glenn probably has a lot more to say on this.
Well, I'll just echo what you said, as an output of our report that we wrote, that the community wrote, I should say, the selection of the next director should have as a foremost priority an individual who is committed, deeply committed to bringing about the changes that need to occur in the Peace Corps agency. And I think that individual will need to set that clear pathway and plan forward at all levels, from training to programming to recruiting, and all the recommendations that were made by our community and expectations that our community has. And again, I think it was you, Michelle, who said, our voice is stronger together. We will need to advocate strongly and loudly on these issues. It's not just going to happen.
Alana, anything that you want to add to Michelle and Glenn's thoughts?
Sure. Once again, coming from the historical perspective, I think one of the weaknesses or one of the challenges that Peace Corps faces is the continuity issue. So Peace Corps directors don't tend to serve for very long. Carrie Hassler-Adlet was a notable exception, but besides that, you have a couple of years and then it's already the next leadership. And what gets focus is what gets money. So where the money is directed, that's where the changes happen. And Peace Corps is on somewhat of a shoestring budget. And so the decision has to be really strong from leadership and there has to be continuity. Now, the two places where continuity in the Peace Corps exists is really in many ways outside of Peace Corps headquarters. It's us, the RPCV community. And the more united we are, the more we're on the same page, the more we can push Peace Corps in the directions where Peace Corps should be going. And then it's the host country national staff. They're the ones who don't fall under the 5-year rule. They're the ones who have the whole institutional memory of the Peace Corps that is missing in headquarters in many ways. So the more we can help keep continuity going and have this, and remember the lessons we learned, I think the better off we are. And then we can push for things like making training, because there were efforts around this, like every decade, this idea comes up or ideas around this come up, and then there's a little bit of an effort around it and a little bit of money gets thrown at it, and you see, the graphs, the percentages go up a little bit, and as soon as the next director comes in or as soon as the next administration comes in, it goes back to where it was. So continuity.
Thanks, Alana, and thanks, Glenn and Michelle as well, for sort of shedding light on what we can do in terms of training and support. I want to actually keep this with you, Alana. We are having this panel sort of in response to the A Towering Task film that you directed and released. We have a question from one of the audience members. Thank you for your words with us today. They say, as a Black PCV who enjoyed your work at its premiere at the Kennedy Center in September, I was the only visible Black face I saw in the full theater for my showing. There is a Facebook page with over 4,800 Black RPCVs. Would you be surprised to find that a lot of the discussion regarding your work on that page was around where are the Black people, where are the people of color? Did the directors know that Black volunteers served or volunteers of color served? And this sort of speaks a little bit to Michelle's point as well. She mentioned in her commentary that it was hard to find anyone who looked like her in your documentary as a Peace Corps volunteer. So Alana, how do you respond to that, to the lack of volunteers of color featured in your film?
Sure. Well, I have to say, this Zoom call, I don't know how many Peace Corps Zoom calls you guys are on, but this Zoom call is amazing to me because I feel as a white person, I'm in the minority and it feels great. But if you look at the average RPCV Zoom call, first of all, it's an older demographic and they're all white. And so the community itself that comes together, it tends to reflect more the older volunteers and the older demographics, unfortunately. So for the documentary, we had a couple of challenges, and I wish we would have featured more. And I would love to have more voices in there too. We interviewed a fair amount of BIPOC volunteers and put in voices whenever we could. So Ken Burns gets 13 hours to do a documentary about the Park Service. We have an hour and 47 minutes for this documentary and get a lot of pushback of, oh, do you have a 1 hour version, or do you have a half-hour version maybe? So for 60 years of history of getting it in there, getting the voices that would take us along that path of history was challenging. And the first thing we did, so I worked on the Forest Service documentary for its 100-year anniversary, and let me tell you about a wide organization. We looked into who are the scholars about the Peace Corps. There are not a lot of scholars, and there are very few people who wrote about the Peace Corps in terms of its history. So there are individual volunteer experience books that are out there, and they're great and important to have. But when you look for books that cover the entire history of the Peace Corps or approach it from a scholarly perspective of different aspects of the Peace Corps, the stack's about this high, and they're all white. And luckily there were some women among them, so that's good. And we had an Irish man, but there wasn't a lot of diversity. There wasn't a lot of scholarship. There wasn't a lot of diversity of who was doing the scholarship. And they were the ones who were informing, like taking us along the timeline of the history. And then as we were interviewing volunteers, we tried to take advantage of opportunities where there were volunteer gatherings where we could interview more volunteers, which is where I got to meet Misha, who was of course brilliant, to interview. And then we had, there's this balance too, like somebody said, just bringing in the voices for the sake of having more diverse faces in the documentary doesn't really solve the problem in telling the story. And we sure made an effort that, we went to 3 countries. We went to the Dominican Republic, we went to Liberia, and we went to the Ukraine. And wherever we could, we looked for those diverse voices and the diverse experiences. But it wasn't easy. And yeah, no, if I could go back, I mean, we finished our documentary in 2019, and I have to say I have learned a lot in 2020, and I would probably put a lot more emphasis on finding not just diverse faces, but the voices that can tell us about these turning points. So when I say there were these efforts along the way that always then get forgotten, is I would have loved to have talked to Carolyn Payton. She was the first African-American female director of the Peace, first female director, first African-American director of the Peace Corps. Unfortunately, she passed away before we started the documentary. She would have been an amazing voice to talk about her efforts. She came from the civil rights movement. She had a lot of insights. I would have loved to have talked to Franklin Williams, one of the founders of the Peace Corps, who also came out of the civil rights movement, and he unfortunately passed away. I would have loved to have talked to C. Payne Lucas. He had passed away. But we would probably put more sleuthing time and work into finding those voices that can give us the insights of what were the efforts over time and why did they succeed or not succeed.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alana. And I think I'm seeing some things, I'm seeing a couple comments in the chat, like part 2 of the documentary, focusing on volunteers of color, and speaking to Lindsay and Darnesha's points, hearing from counterparts and what they're doing in their communities now, what Peace Corps has looked like for them years later. So
there's really actually a really good point to that, the counterparts, because that was one of the things we really wanted to focus on. We're like, this can't just be American voices. We have to have the counterparts in there, especially because they have the institutional memory of the Peace Corps. And it was so hard to get host country national voices, to get the voices of the counterparts and the people that are there that wouldn't sing Kumbaya about the Peace Corps. Because there was a layer this thick when you interviewed somebody, the first half hour would always be about, we're so grateful that Peace Corps is here. We love our Peace Corps volunteers. Peace Corps is wonderful. No, you can't say anything critical about the Peace Corps. And to get through that to anything that resembled any kind of
criticism or critical
actual journalistic part was really hard. It was very difficult.
Sure. Well, I can definitely feel part 2 of the documentary brewing here as a result of this call. Okay, team, we just have a couple minutes left. I want to just end with one final question, tying it all back to Friends of South Africa, the sort of interconnectedness between South Africa and the United States' racial justice movements. So if you'll just bear with us as we go just a couple minutes over, I want to pose this last question specifically to Ronel, but of course Darnesha, as an RPCV from South Africa, if you want to chime in as well, please do. Ronel, as our South African on the panel, our non-American voice, hailing high. The question is, are there any thoughts or lessons learned, about what the United States can learn from South Africa's reparations, from South Africa's experience? So I'd love to end with this question with your voice, and as we look forward, what can the U.S. take from South Africa's experience?
I mean, that's a really, really hard question that I always kind of grapple with, and I always have very interesting conversations. I think one thing, and I remember actually saying this while lecturing at a university in the States, whilst you had your other president, and I had said something to the effect of, the good thing about South Africa is that if we have bad presidents, we actually get rid of them, which is an actual fact, and with immediate effect. But I guess, like, on a more serious note, the one thing that I found very interesting, and I always hear this, what students kind of share with us, is that there seems to be like a lot more kind of openness in terms of how people share information. So, for example, Americans still don't talk about like they don't identify someone by what it is that they see. So, for example, a South African, if someone sees me, they'll be like, Black woman wearing da 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 da. Like, they'll describe the whole me. You know, in the US, they'll find so many other markers to describe who I am, where it could have been so much easier to just say I'm a Black woman. But that kind of like, what do they call that, respectability politics is really so kind of glaring for me, because it says something about like the fact that you don't want to say something so publicly, but you have those conversations privately, and how those private conversations boil into like the politics of the day, for me is completely mind-blowing. And I do think that there's something to be said about that being, something to be addressed. And I'm not saying like, just call everyone out and be rude about it, but, be comfortable about getting into that space and start like then creating those spaces for discomfort to kind of increase the conversation that happens. I also would like to say that what we see when we have Peace Corps volunteers or university students studying abroad in anywhere in the world, but particularly when they come to the continent, for me, there's always something to be said specifically about like the service elements, so what is it that draws them here is the one thing. And the second thing for me really is the question around that student or that person that decides to study abroad is really not the one we want to preach to. They are the America that is open to learn and open to kind of engage outside of their space. And that's the America that we get to see, and that's wonderful. So I can say positive things about those who are engaged, but those who we don't engage. So like I was explaining to Nicole, one of my first racial encounters actually happened on my first trip to the US. And that's crazy, coming from a country where, I just told you where I lived. It was like racially designed, you know what I mean? But I never had encountered anything so kind of in my face and visceral. And so I would say that, it's great that Peace Corps is having these conversations, but I think it's about what do we do with the things that's happening outside of our space, that we are challenging our spaces at home. And that's very important as a South African, because we need to do the same. Xenophobia still being issues around, race. So like you can't, if I go into spaces, I have to say, I'm registered colored, but I'm, politically Black. And that means something very different in this context. And it allows me either a voice or not a voice, And so I think that there's something very important about the lessons that we learn outside of our space. How do we bring that back as well? But I know that there's so much to cover, and we wouldn't have enough time to be speaking about those. But I would want to say that it's quite interesting to kind of see how in this COVID period, a lot of the things that had almost been hidden is now in everyone's faces, because you just absolutely cannot hide what is exacerbated at this time. And so I would say that this is a great time for organizations like Peace Corps and others to start elevating the conversations and also bringing about the actions as it relates to having these decolonial conversations. So I'm very excited to continue the conversations offline as I start engaging these wonderful panelists. And thank you so much again to the Friends of South Africa, Nicole, and the rest of the team for making this possible, and for the amazing panel that we have.
Thank you so much, Ronel. What an incredible way for us to end this event today. I love what you said about us needing to increase the space for discomfort. And you are absolutely correct. 2020 was an incredibly uncomfortable year for a lot of people. And I'd say that we need to strap in and buckle up, because it's only going to get more uncomfortable from here. And it's only in those spaces of discomfort can we actually grow? Can we ask the hard questions? Can we begin to look at one another across the globe in this interconnected, multicultural world that we live in, and say we are actually here to build to build a humanity and to treat one another equitably, and it's not going to be easy. So thank you, Ronel, for ending us on such a sort of powerful note. I'm going to formally close our panel now. I think this has just been an absolutely fascinating and dynamic conversation, not only across the panelists, but even in the chat, the different questions that you all have been asking. As we say in Sepedi, the language that I learned in Limpopo in South Africa during my Peace Corps service, thank you so much for being here with us, for attending this webinar, for watching from home, wherever in the world that you may be. And thank you to those of you who have attended this panel, this conversation, and you're actually going to commit to these practices and do the work and organize and action some of the things that we've been talking about today. You know, to the entire team at Friends of South Africa, to Sam Crawford, the chair and founder of Friends of South Africa, for being our host today. Thank you so much for convening such an thank you to Misha Robinson, to I Am We Are, for serving as our nonprofit partner for this event. And then again, to each of you for registering and donating to their tremendous cause. Thank you to Lindsay Allen, Michelle Choy, Glenn Blumhorst, Alana DeJoseph, Ronel Stevens, and Darnesha Tabor for sharing your stories and sharing your perspectives with us today. Your voices are heard and are incredibly important to this ongoing conversation. Thank you to the National Peace Corps Association, RPCVs Addressing Racism, and Decolonizing Peace Corps for furthering the national and international conversations around equity in the Peace Corps and in the role that it plays. Thank you, of course, to the Peace Corps globally and Peace Corps South Africa. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to all of the host country staff members, the small communities, the warm host families across the globe who welcomed me and many of the folks on this panel into their countries, into their homes as Peace Corps volunteers. We would not even be able to have this conversation were it not for your hospitality, your generosity, and your willingness to let random American strangers into your lives, into your homes, and into your communities in order to try and make this world, you know, a bit smaller and a bit more familiar. So once again, everyone, thank you so much. Don't forget that Black Lives Matter. Happy Peace Corps Week, everybody. We're going to formally end the panel and close this call now, but I think a couple of us are gonna stay on afterward. We'll stop recording if we wanna continue to answer a couple more questions. So thank you so much, everyone. Continue these conversations, continue to organize, and until next time, thank you.